Okay, I want to welcome everyone to the Value Added Producer Grant Overview webinar. My name is Marissa Christie. I work with the Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development. And I thought that you all would enjoy seeing me rather than the screen for just a couple of minutes. So what our goal is tonight is to give you an idea of this program and help you understand if it's right for you. This is a lot of work to apply, but it can be a very rewarding program if it's right for your business, your value-added agribusiness. So let's go ahead and we'll get started. Get back over to my slides. So I work for the Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development, and I will be presenting today. I am the Agribusiness Grant Facilitation Program Coordinator. We will talk about what that means more here in just a minute. We also have with us Katie Miller. She's a Business Development Specialist Assistant with KCAD. KCAD's mission is to foster business success and growth by developing and delivering technical assistance and by providing educational opportunities for agricultural and rural businesses seeking to enhance their economic opportunities in and around the Commonwealth of Kentucky. That's a lot of words to say that we help with business planning, marketing plans. We also will do things such as feasibility studies from time to time as businesses need them. And we can talk a little bit more about KCAD later. The Agribusiness Grant Facilitation Program, I won't read all those wonderful words, but I will say that we are funded by the Kentucky Agricultural Development Fund, which works through the Kentucky Agricultural Development Board. This program is fully funded by that, so we are here to serve Kentucky producers and assist them in finding, applying for, and receiving money through different funding options, including grants. And we also have a couple of other people with us today. We have Dean Tandy, who is with the USDA-Rural Development. He is a business cooperative specialist, and he is our state contact for the Value Added Producer Grant Program. He will assist in the program overview and helping answer some questions. If you have a question, type it in the chat box. We may or may not be able to get to them immediately. Some we may email you, and if you're watching this and you have a question, feel free to email me. My contact information will be later in the presentation. We also have with us Ben, who is currently interning with KCAD, and he is going to help Katie with some of these questions. Okay, so really this is a two-part presentation. This is KCAD's view of the Value Added Producer Grant. This should be labeled Marissa's view. We also have the nuts and bolts of the VAPG, which is the USDA's view. Dean has prepared some slides that we have used a few times when talking about the Value Added Producer Grant, and we're going to go over those because it has a lot to do with what's actually required. I'm going to take just a moment and talk about some grant words that you may hear me say. One of them is NOFA, which means Notice of Funds Available, which probably means about as much to you as the word NOFA. NOFA is the way of saying the grant is open. It's the notice that comes out that lets everybody know the grant is open, what the requirements are, and how much money there is. That's always nice. And then we also will talk briefly mention DUNS and SAM. Those are not two people you need to get in contact with. Those are government registration systems necessary for applying for federal grant money. We do have resources and even some other recorded webinars on this topic. If I say anything you don't understand, type your question in the chat box. Katie's going to stop me to ask at appropriate times, or I may just try to get a hold of you later depending on the depth of the question. Okay, so what is KCAD doing for VAPG applicants? This year, we're going to host a series of webinar workshops to assist applicants through the process starting in late June and early July. We will be asking for your input on days of the week and times. I will also give you homework. I actually taught for about 2 years, and there's nothing better than giving people a lot of homework. And Dean thinks this is very funny because he knows that I will ask all kinds of questions of you once you start handing me paperwork. And we're also working on a post-award services for grantees, which means that once you are awarded the grant, you are able to get your money. As you can see here, if you were to get a value-added producer grant, you get a nice big check presentation. However, the bank does not accept those checks, and the USDA will not honor them. You have to have some forms, receipts, paperwork, etc. to go with them. This is actually from the Horseshoe Bend Vineyard, which was awarded a value-added producer grant a few years ago. I think they got around $290,000. The ceiling used to be $300,000. This last go around, it was $200,000. And we don't know what it will be in the future. We're hoping it will stay $200,000. Okay, so here's the bad news. What VAPG will not do. It will not pay you or your family for your time. It will not buy you that beautiful piece of equipment you had your eye on. It will not build you your beautiful new facility. It will not pay you to raise the vegetables that you're going to turn into relish. It will, any production expense, it might pay you processing costs for turning production to relish, but it won't pay you to make the cucumbers or the pickles. It will not pay for research and development. When I say research and development here, I don't mean market research or market development. I mean, it will not pay to see how to make the product. If you're making a new product, if you were doing some sort of special strawberry Pop-Tarts type deal, how we're going to make it, how we're going to make it shelf stable, VAPG will not pay to do that, but it will pay to do market research on how the strawberry Pop-Tart you've already developed, which you can't call it a Pop-Tart, pretty sure that's trademarked, might go over. And it will not pay you to do what you're already doing at current levels. It wants you to expand your business in some way. There's lots of different ways we can address this, but it won't pay you to just keep on keeping on. That will not work. So, after all that bad news, there actually is some good news. It will pay for processing costs if you're doing a new endeavor or market expansion. It will help pay for marketing, not the marketing you're already doing, but marketing that you're doing to new areas. If you're expanding your market, it will help pay for that. It can help hire additional people, whether it's you already are producing, let's say, wine or beef jerky, and you need more people because you're going to start marketing in Cincinnati as well. That can pay for that, and it can pay for helping market in Cincinnati. It can help pay for someone else to help you make the beef jerky. Can do all those things. That's what we call a market expansion. It will also pay for planning and feasibility work. There are a few entities in Kentucky that do planning and feasibility work. KCAD is among them. Also, the Food Science Innovation Center at UK has assisted us, and we've assisted them with feasibility work for value-added producer grants before. So if you're interested in that, definitely talk to us in the beginning so that we can make sure that your planning grant is prepared in such a way to do that. Very often, unfortunately, we do see people spend a lot of money and a lot of time into endeavors that may not quite work. It's better to make sure it will work. Well, there's no feasibility study is a 100% guarantee, but it can give you a better idea. My rule of thumb is that if you will never see it again, the value-added producer grant will pay for that. Tractor, you're going to see it every year. Labels for your expanded market, you'll never see those guys again. So tractor's not eligible, labels are eligible. If you have to pay shipping cost to get to your expanding market, eligible. If you have to pay for labor, okay, you're going to see the person who works for you again, let's hope, but you're never going to see that labor again. That's already gone and out the door. If you can keep it, it's not grant eligible. So those are the basics of good news and bad news, and now we have the mixed news. VAPG will pay for 50% of the cost of the project. This does not mean 50% of your operating cost. That would be great, but it just doesn't work that way. Like I said, it doesn't pay for things you've already done. So great, it pays for 50% of your market expansion. It pays for 50% of you starting to add value to your grapes into raisins. It doesn't give you that big check up front. You actually have to get reimbursed for it. That means that after you've done the grant, you're going to have to complete forms, keep track of receipts, and all those lovely things that none of you farmers out there, or very few of you, like to do. You also have to show that you have the match up front. They will not give a grant to someone who cannot afford to match the money, which means that you have to show that you can afford to pay your half, and if they award you the grant, you get to show that again. Then they will stop asking you for bank letters to prove that you have money. Now, the last part is that you can make half of your match, 25% of the project total, family labor in-kind contributions. We've had a lot of people do this over the years, and we've had them be successful in getting a grant while doing in-kind matches or family labor matches. However, it can be difficult to track, it can be difficult to justify, and while there isn't necessarily a point value that goes with having a cash match, it makes it really enticing when you know that someone's going to be able to afford the product and they have more skin in the game. I know that our labor is skin in the game. I know that your raw product is skin in the game. The cash, money walks and talks, and that's true in the grant world as well. That said, I don't think it provides you a lot of benefit to provide more match than what is required. We have currently some grantees in the state that are in that position, and it can make it more difficult down the line. You want to provide as much match as required to do the project and not allocate extra resources. Okay. Are you eligible? I have been on phone conversations, been 15 minutes in, and they're talking about how they make the world's best wine. And they're really excited because they've never applied for a federal grant. And I say, where are you located? And they said, we're in downtown Louisville, which this is a made-up example. But I say, oh, there's a vineyard in downtown Louisville? And they say, no, we buy all our grape juice. And I say, oh, you're not eligible. This is a value-added producer grant. By the definition, you must be a producer. You must make at least 51% of the raw commodity. Not only that, but if you're going for market expansion, you have to make 51% of what's expanded, which means that if you had a farm that was so big, only so big, and you had dairy cattle and you couldn't support more dairy cattle, that when you went to expand your market, unless you figured out a way to make your dairy cattle produce more, you're going to have to buy all of your expansion from someone else. Then you're not making 51% of the project's product. It has to be 51% of the project, not just your total production. And then do you add value? A lot of people talk a lot of different ways about added value. They talk about agritourism. I have heard of honeybees. I have heard of many things that add value. There are 5 ways that value is added through the Value-Added Producer Grant Program. The first one is the most traditional one and probably the one the program really started with, and that was a change in physical state. If it is grapes to wine, milk to cheese, berries to jam, something that cannot be undone to the product. Even if you dice your tomatoes because you cannot put that tomato back together again, if it has been Humpty Dumptied, it's value added because it cannot go back. However, there are other things. When you add value, you also have to be adding value. If your product is worth less diced, then you haven't added value. For those of you who sell locally, you know that many times local food can bring additional revenue rather than if you were wholesaling it or what people pay at the grocery store. So that is added value, and we can help you calculate that. If you sell organic, then you also are able to add value in the way that it is raised. And that's another popular way that we are seeing that people add value, in the way that it is produced. That said, agritourism does not make your grapes worth more. They do not consider that added value. Honeybees, they do not consider added value, although it may help pollinate your crops. It does not make the pollinated crops worth more to be pollinated by bees that are in the field that you have provided. And the last way that you can become ineligible is not sticking with the program. You can make yourself ineligible after you've gotten the grant by not doing what you promised to do. That's something we're not going to worry about tonight. Have hope. You will see this picture in almost every one of my webinars. I love this little soybean. People in Kentucky do get these grants. We plan to get more of them, and I'm sure Dean would be very happy if we received more. It's that's part of his programs that he oversees. And the next thing is, don't get discouraged by the process. That's what we're here for. We're not here to get discouraged with you. We're here to help keep you from getting discouraged. I had a grant applicant last year that 3 days before the grant, when we had a complete business plan, we had a 95% application. We were just editing, told me, I think I'm done. That grant was turned in. If I had to drive to their house, that grant was turned in. It can be a long process. That's why we're starting it now, to help alleviate some of that stress at the end, both for you and for me. And you're off. So the first thing is to develop a timeline. If you want to work with us, we are going to be putting out a timeline, homework assignments, everything that I can think of to get you on track. Budgets, narratives, federal forms are all going to take longer than you want to. And you're also going to have a registration process with the DUNS and the SAM.gov. And unfortunately, if there's something that can go wrong in that process, it will go wrong. It's a very Murphy's Law type scenario for those of you who are fans of chaos. You're going to need a business plan. Not you might need, you're going to need a business plan. You can do it without one if you're requesting less than $50,000, but it's going to be scored the same as if you have one. So you can need a business plan. And you're going to need letters of support. We've taught, a lot of people want to get letters of support from their local congressman or political person. To be honest, a letter of support from a producer that's going to be supplying you with some of your cucumbers, less than 49%, would mean more to the grant reviewers. People who are going to be buying the cucumbers, people who are going to be helping you make those cucumbers into pickles, the processor, those people who are actually hands-on involved in the project are better letters of support. However, they don't write as many as your local politicians, so they're going to take a little longer. And you're going to have to decide whether to write it yourself or contact someone else. There are pros and cons to grant writers. A good grant writer will get in there and understand your business and understand what's going on with you. It may be someone you already know. They are not generally free. They can be, but generally they are not. This grant's going to take a long time. It can take an experienced grant writer 80 hours of work, which is part of why we're going to do the webinar series over 8 weeks, because that's a lot easier than trying to get it done in 2. Oh yeah, so where could you go for business planning? I'm going to put the unfettered KCAD plug in here. We do business plans for producers and other agribusinesses. We also do feasibility studies. We can help you with a marketing plan. And we have a decent bit of experience with the Value Added Producer Grant Program. We're really hopeful that this year we'll have some more funded, and I think that there's a good possibility. I've got Dean beside me. He won't tell me anything, though. He doesn't know yet, though, do you, Dean? I do not know. So does anyone have a question up to now? It doesn't look like we do, so we're going to keep rolling. Dean has promised me that he will interrupt as I go through his slides, and I'm also allowed to point at him and say, Dean, can you explain this? If you have trouble hearing Dean, please let us know. Oh, here's a little thing. If you want more information, mchristie@growkentuckyag.com for me, and then for Katie, who's our general intake for KCAD, it's kmmiller@kcard.info. Or you could visit kcard.info. Or you could sign up for my email list, which is at growkentuckyag.com, or email me. That'll work too. So these are from the fiscal year 2014. This is the general program description. We don't expect extensive changes between now and 2015. They did pass a new farm bill, and I will tell you that they passed a lot more money in this new farm bill than what we had before. We're looking at $62 million in the farm bill, which is enough that you could have 6 grants per state on average if they put it all out in one funding cycle. That would be a lot. In order to get 6 grants, based on the fact that less than 50% of them are generally funded in our state, I need at least 12 good, strong applicants, which is why I'm doing this tonight. The purpose of the Value-Added Producer Program, oh, this is the USDA's viewpoint, not my watered down, what Marissa thinks it should be version, is to provide grant funds to agricultural producers for planning activities and working capital expenses to assist them in receiving a greater share of the consumer's dollar for value-added agricultural products. Milk is worth more as cheese. Grapes are worth more as wine. Strawberries are worth more as jam, generally. If you process it, the end product is generally worth more. So I've talked a little bit about applicant eligibility, then product eligibility. We've also already talked a little bit about that. Now, purpose eligibility. Like I said, it will not pay you for what you're already doing. You have to be expanding your market or going into a new venture. Matching eligibility, we've actually already covered that a little bit. You cannot pretend that there's a match there. You actually do have to have a letter from the bank or a bank statement. You've got to have something. Or if you're doing in-kind match, we can talk more about that. There are other eligibility requirements. Nonprofits are not eligible for this grant. Small businesses, individual producers, they are eligible, but nonprofits are not eligible. So here we have independent producers, farmer or rancher cooperatives. So if you are a cooperative, you are eligible. Of course, to be eligible as a cooperative, an agricultural producer group, or a majority-controlled producer-based business venture, any of those three, the majority of your members must be producers. You can't have an investor that owns 75% of the company that doesn't actually produce the wheat you're going to turn into a specialty flour. You've got to be producers. As I said before, we have a change in physical state that cannot be undone, that you can't undo. Produce in a manner that enhances value. So in that, you're going to talk about organic, you know, if you grow it organically, if you say that it's natural, if you say that your beef is grass-fed, that's going to be produced in a manner that enhances value. And in your business plan, it needs to clarify how much value is added to that product. Actually, in any of these, how much value is added to that product should be addressed in a business plan. Physical segregation, that's a really interesting one. I've not seen an application, and Dean, you can correct me here, in the state of Kentucky for physical separation. The example given generally in the template and in the NOFA is genetically modified corn or non-genetically modified corn kept separate from genetically modified corn. Now, for those of you familiar with corn genetics, you know that this can be difficult. You either have to have them basically in a closed tunnel with pollen filters because corn pollen can travel for at least a mile, or you have to hand pollinate. Ag commodity that is a renewable source of energy. It will actually help you with a methane generating, if you're a dairy and you want to go for a value-added producer grant, if you are using the manure to generate methane for power that will be used on site, that is an eligible application. Locally produced agricultural food product. When we say locally produced from the USDA's perspective, I'm sitting in Lexington, Kentucky this evening because I have the traveling webinar show. You could actually make it to Chicago. It's within 400 miles. So if you're within a 400-mile radius and you're selling within that radius, you are a locally produced agricultural product, which means that most people selling in a farmer's market are actually eligible. However, it also means to be eligible, if you're going to have to increase, in order for a project to be eligible, you would have to dramatically increase your production and increase your market geographically. It's not something that everyone can do. Your consumer base must be expanded, and a greater portion of the revenue must be available to the producer. If you were raising cattle and you were getting them processed and selling specialty cuts of meat, but you actually weren't making any more doing that because you were paying so much for the processing and the marketing, then you don't have a value-added product because you're not making any more money. The idea of this is that more of the money goes back to you. If that doesn't happen, it's not eligible. So there's two types of grants. There's planning activities, and we don't see, Dean, we haven't had a whole lot of planning grants in the state, but we did have one awarded last year, correct? And I wish that more people did feasibility studies in their value-added grants, because it could really help identify markets more than just a marketing plan. It can identify cost. It takes a lot more work than a business or marketing plan.
I know the situation is that typically they have to apply for a planning grant first with their idea, and it goes through a thorough study of their idea with professional third parties, and then if they hopefully get awarded for that, and then come back and apply for working capital grant after that. So in essence, you can get 2 grants in that process instead of just one, and you get it done professionally at both levels. So I think it has a major advantage to people.
Actually, one of our current grantees in the state, Kenny's Cheese, they had a planning grant, and then several years later went back and got a working capital grant. And the planning grant identified the plan that they carried out in the working capital grant. So that's a really good use, and that's a really good point, because you cannot get 2 working, unless you do planning and working capital, you cannot get 2 value-added producer grants for the same thing. If you are a winery that's already had 1 grant for making wine, you cannot go and get a second grant for making wine. Matching funds have to be at least 50% of the project cost. There's no way around that. I know that it can present a hardship, but KCAD is working with other people. Even if you have a loan guarantee that you're going to be able to have a loan, that counts as cash. That's still cash that you're going to have to pay. So it must be spent at a rate equal to or greater than the grant funds, which means you get paid on a reimbursement basis. They won't, if you haven't met your match requirement, they can't give you their 50%. Match must be provided by the applicant or a third party in the form of cash or in-kind funds. You can't have third-party in-kind match. If Joe, your neighbor, is retired and he wants to in-kind match labor by coming over and shearing your sheep, and, well, that would actually not be match, because, never mind. If Joe wants to help you produce wine, I go give you that example. If Joe wants to help you produce wine and he wants to do it for in-kind because he's a family friend and just really believes this is going to succeed, get a letter from Joe saying, I'm going to do this in-kind. Go to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and see how much Joe is worth as a volunteer, and that's in-kind.
Or you could have a family member of a house, like a parent or an uncle or an aunt, something like that, that would be willing to put cash up as an actor. But I mean, you have things that would not always very much, but there's possible too.
Yeah, you don't have to put the cash up yourself. And it can be somebody else, as long as there's cash in there that is available to you.
And there's no conflict of interest within that deal.
Yeah, they don't. There's no
strings attached.
Yeah. And it has to be obviously eligible purposes and for eligible sources. You can't use federal money to match federal money. That is not allowed. If you could, I would probably never have to work. Okay, so you can do an in-kind match if you're making wine. You can match your grapes that are contributing to the project up to 25% of value. Grapes are not the most valuable things raw. Or like I said, applicant or family member time. That can be in-kind match. So grant period eligibility, when the NOFA comes out, and as I said NOFA, the notice that the funding is going to be available comes out, it will tell you how long you have to do the project. You cannot go beyond that date. I'll be honest with you, these things never start on the date that we think they're going to start on. I add 6 months, maybe just 3.
The perfect example I can give on that is like the NOFA we're under right now. It was supposed to be the award when the NOFA came out that we're operating now. The anticipated award date was, I believe, April the 15th. And here we are. It still has not been awarded, and they're projecting not to get the awards announced until June the 15th. So that's 60 days just in this particular NOFA. Actually,
in this particular NOFA, it ended up closing after or right at the anticipated award date.
Yeah.
Right. It closed like April the
right.
18th or something.
Yeah.
Odd. Completeness eligibility. If you don't have all your I's dotted and T's crossed on those federal forms, there is nothing, as much as Dean would love to, due after the deadline is closed, he cannot say, hey, you forgot to give me form 424B. It's done. It's over. You have to be complete. Market expansion proposals, that's probably the majority of proposals that we get where we've had a value-added business that has done fairly well. They've been doing it for at least 2 years, and so they want to apply for working capital to make their market bigger. Maybe they're located in Frankfurt and they want to expand their market into Louisville, Cincinnati, and Lexington. Maybe they're mostly operating in Lexington and they want to start marketing other places. That's going to take additional processing costs. That's going to take additional marketing costs, shipping costs, travel costs. So those kind of costs would be what would be eligible for the grant under a market expansion proposal. You cannot take more than 3 years to complete your grant. And we said the NOFA is going to restrict the starting and ending dates of the project. Have to have everything. Market expansion are only considered for $50,000 or more. There's a reason. There's something called a simplified application if you're asking for less than $50,000. Unfortunately, the simplified application is the same application template that you will find online, and they will have a new template for next year, I assume. The simplified application just means you do not have to have a feasibility study and business plan because you're requesting less than $50,000. And the market expansion must be an independent producer. That's a very good point. Dean just pointed at the screen to remind me the first we've skipped, Marissa. And a feasibility study is also not required for market expansion. If you're going into a new venture, less than 2 years old, and you're asking for more than $49,999, you must have a feasibility study. No ifs, ands, or buts, which is where a planning grant comes in. Paper applications are submitted to the RD state office in the applicant state.
Or they can be submitted to our area office out in the state.
As Dean said, the area offices, you can also submit them there. Electronic applications can be submitted through grants.gov. We're getting a little better with grants.gov. Me personally, I know the state office still sometimes does not appreciate the grants.gov reliability. If you're going to do it by grants.gov, I suggest you submit it 4 days before the deadline. It will take you 48 hours to get the thing that says your submission is complete and done. And if you submit it 2 days before and you don't get that letter within 48 hours, you now have no time because the deadline's closed.
If you wait to the last minute on grants.gov, you wasted a lot of time.
Or you should have a backup in Lexington that has a fax machine you can fax your entire grant to. You can't because you cannot fax it to the office. They cannot accept it via fax. No email, no fax. It's either grant.gov or paper. That's your options. It's very competitive. It's national. We do not at this point have a state allocation. As we've said, it's unforgiving, I's dotted, T's crossed. There are grant writers who have worked with this program for a long time. It just so happens that a couple of them really enjoy reading other people's written word and tearing it to pieces. I'm among those. So if you want to get more information from Dean, here is his contact information. You can go to the website on the screen, and you can also steal information from other states. I do this frequently. If you type in Oregon, VAPG, USDA, they have their very own webinars, templates, and even how to make a business plan for the value added. We actually sort of use some of their stuff, and Dean and I have discussed there's no use in, well, I don't think there's any use in Kentucky recreating the wheel since they did it. And just to reemphasize what I do, I work with the Agribusiness Grant Facilitation Program. Everything I do, for those of you who are familiar with the tobacco funds, I am directly funded from that. I am your tobacco funding at work. That's why I work very hard to try to get as many different types of producers in the state money as possible. The idea behind the tobacco funds was to help diversify, and Kentucky, or the way that the legislature has used the tobacco funds is they have used so much of it to help diversify Kentucky agriculture and add value to Kentucky agriculture. And KCAD is a proud recipient of a lot of that funding. We also receive funding from the USDA, but my particular position is funded entirely through Kentucky Ag Development Fund. Is the PowerPoint going to be made available? Alvina, what I can do is I'll try to get it up there tomorrow. I apologize if you can only hear the audio, but we'll try to get that up there tomorrow for you. I'm sorry? Oh, and it will also be up on YouTube. So if you're having a little problem now, there will be a video available on YouTube afterwards, assuming that I have not managed to say anything terribly incorrect. And at this point, Dean, is there anything that you would like to add about the program?
Marissa's covered very well. Probably the thing I would re-emphasize, I guess, here's one, is that is to get started, like you said, to get started as early as possible in the process, because you're going to run into problems and questions and issues that's almost guaranteed. And if you allow yourself the maximum amount of time that you possibly can to get this thing done, you'll be miles ahead of the game. I can promise you, if you wait for the last week or two before, it's not going to happen. You're just going to be frustrated and waste a lot of time if that's the way you go about it. So please don't do that. Another thing I might mention too is that I don't think, as mentioned, but on the planning grant side, the maximum is $75,000 on that one, and like Marissa said, on the working capital is $200,000. The program, the way I kind of envision the program going is that the $62 million is going to be available within the next NOFA whenever it comes out, which we think will come out before the end of this calendar year, and it probably will. The one thing I might mention on that is that the national office has set a scoring minimum that in order for an application to be awarded by the national office, it must score at least probably 60 points on this next go around for it to be awarded, for the national office to consider awarding that particular application. So you have to have a pretty bad application in some ways of looking at that to score less than, this time it was 50 points. On the one right now is a 50-point minimum to get awarded by the national office. But the other thing I might mention too, as far as the scoring part of the process, there are 3 scores that are given to each eligible application that we receive. It gets a score from our Kentucky Rural Development, which is a panel of rural development employees who come together to look at the application score as a group. And it also receives, the national office assigns 2 independent reviewers, not from the state where the application came from, to do an independent, 2 other independent scores. So the national office gathers up three totally independent scores on each and every application. They average those 3 scores to get the final score, and then of course the high scoring applicant is going to get awarded, go down the list. And I've never had $62 million to work with before, so I used to say this all the time. When they go down the list, they always run out of money before they run out of applications that are eligible and that could have been funded. But with $62 million, I assume that could still happen even with that much money. But it may not. There may be a lot more people find it because of the fact there's $62 million out there this time too, so across the country. So it's hard to say what's going to happen for sure. Typically, this program only has the NOFA typically only has around 20 to 22 million, not 62 million. So we always had way more eligible applicants apply than we had money in the past. So it's a whole different scenario this time. We'll see how it works.
Yeah, and Dean is really great about answering questions. And if you are, for some reason, you can ask me, and then if I don't know, I will ask Dean. Or I'll probably check with Dean anyway. And then if he doesn't know, he will go on to the national office for clarification. Part of the reason we're starting this process in late June and early July is that it's going to take a long time. And no matter when if this thing comes out on August 1st, I want people ready. If it comes out on September 30th, I want people ready. It's very hard because usually there's a 45 to 60 day application window. And we were discussing before we went live here that the last template was about 60 pages long. That's the template. That's not including your government forms. That's the template of going through and checking the boxes and before you write any answers to questions. So that's a very, very long time. So I'm going to let you see my lovely camera one more time. If you have any more questions, please let us know. Again, you can go to growkentuckyag.com to contact me or see other funding opportunities and other webinars. If you are not on the Grow Kentucky Ag funding email list, let me know and we can put you on that. And you can go to kcard.info for more information about KCAD services. If you're interested in what it would be like to get a feasibility study or something done with a planning grant, we would certainly love to talk to you about that, about not just us providing it, but what general expectations are and what the benefits to your business could be. That's something that we would really enjoy discussing with you, because we just don't have a lot of planning application grants in the state, and we could really use some more, just to have a full range of applications. But we do business plans for free, which is probably why we don't have as many planning grants as we could. You just told me you were ruining my planning grant average here by doing business plans for free, because in other states there may or may not be a KCAD who does free business plans for agricultural producers. And we hope to keep those free as long as possible, thanks to generous funding from the USDA and the Kentucky Ag Development Board. But with that, we are going to call it an evening. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and if you're watching this after the recording, I want to thank you for taking the time to stick around with me. It is always a pleasure to